We spoke at length on the Square Ball podcast, Michael and I, about our feelings on the Newcastle takeover, so we probably don't need to retread that ground. But I'm interested to get your point of view on this from a journalistic standpoint. There's a lot being written on The Athletic in the wake of this about the implications, the moral angle, the fan reaction. Where do you start with it?
Well, good point. I said earlier, there's no going back from this, and I don't think there is. You start to realise now that every major takeover that takes place in the Premier League, or any takeover that involves a very, very significant amount of money, is probably going to lean more and more to buyers who have either unsavoury aspects to them or unpopular things about them, or look like the sort of people who shouldn't necessarily be in the division. It is very much a matter of opinion, but I know that there are other writers at The Athletic alongside me who are very critical of this and don't think it's a good thing. One of the places to start, I think, is to say that if you look at Manchester United as an example, at full whack, they think that they should be worth, on the base of the stock market, kind of £4 billion plus. If a club is worth £4 billion, who can feasibly buy that apart from a tiny, tiny number of very, very wealthy individuals, most of whom probably have no interest in owning a football club anyway, or a state with the wealth to do it by clicking their fingers? I mean, it seemed to me that with the Public Investment Fund, PIF from Saudi Arabia, it was absolutely no problem at all for them to buy Newcastle, even though Newcastle were costing £300 million plus. And whereas you see with a lot of takeovers, they take time to go through because there's a lot of, kind of arguing back and forward about the cost and can you get the money together and everything else. And you've seen other attempts at Newcastle come to nothing. And we saw them at Leeds come to nothing. And sometimes it was because the people trying to buy just did not have the cash. In this instance, it was very easy to do because, in the same way as happened at Manchester City, in the same way at Chelsea, when Abramovich basically walked in and said to Bates, "I want this club. Here's the money." It's very, very easy to do. So the Premier League and English football, and not just English football, I mean European football at the top level as well, has managed to put itself in a position now where, through the advance of commercial interests and commercial appetite, just this obsession with making more and more money from the game, clubs are almost too expensive to buy. In order to sell a major club now, you are needing somebody who has the sort of wealth that a state would have. There are clearly massive issues with Saudi Arabia's human rights record, and there's no doubt about that at all. And the people at The Athletic who've written about this have said pretty clearly that, in their view, the reason the Premier League have approved this is essentially down to the fact that the big dispute that was going on between Saudi Arabia and Qatar over television rights. Saudi Arabia had blocked beIN Sports, which is the Qatari broadcaster, which had Premier League rights from broadcasting in Saudi Arabia. There was a lot of piracy and allegations of piracy in Saudi Arabia. That has been resolved. That was resolved last week. And it cannot be a coincidence, I don't think, or it's unlikely to be a coincidence, that gets resolved and suddenly a takeover, which has been in front of a brick wall for months, stroke years, suddenly goes through. And it does make you think that the opposition to this was never anything about human rights or whether it's appropriate that an investment fund with very, very strong links to government, people in Saudi Arabia and the Crown Prince, whether that was ethical or whether that was appropriate. It basically seemed that as soon as the commercial interests of TV rights were protected and everybody was happy, bingo, you're on, and the green light was given.
I think that's why, I said this over on our show, I'm just kind of ambivalent towards the whole thing. It's not anything I can relate to. It doesn't make me feel anything. I don't feel angry. I don't feel jealous. It's just a thing that's happened involving a lot of money. It's just a world I don't understand. It doesn't appeal to me in any way, shape or form. And as we've got back into the Premier League, I found I'm having to shut out a lot of the external noise. I think that's one of the things about this, and just concentrate on the welfare of Leeds and hope that we remain competitive and try and enjoy that for what it is, because this is just a thing that's happened. And I never thought I'd feel ambivalent towards football. Growing up, you get angry at the clubs that you hated and you'd feel passionately about things. And this, I'm just kind of like, well, what can I feel about this?
I think, as it happens, Leeds as a club are quite indifferent to it as well. Radrizzani's quotes from this morning were talking about, needing fair play across the league. But of course, that can lead to suggestions of hypocrisy. If you go back to the Championship, you had that situation where Derby and Leeds were opposing the EFL's TV deal very much because they felt that, rightly, that they were drawing in or clubs who were drawing in the big figures for Sky Sports in the Championship and didn't feel the split of money was fair. But then you get up into the Premier League and suddenly there are the bigger clubs than you and wealthier clubs than you, and it becomes harder to compete. So your mindset shifts. I think Leeds feel that this is not their fight, and although there were the stories last week about the 19 Premier League clubs being very unhappy about this and wanting emergency meetings and so on, I don't expect Leeds to be active in trying to oppose this. And in any case, the Premier League are not going to backtrack on it. This will go ahead. You have to say as well that it's not so long, and this won't happen now, but it's not so long since Radrizzani was talking about the possibility of QSI coming in, Qatari Sports Investments. You could not pretend that QSI don't have links to the Qatari state. You could not pretend that Qatar's human rights record is squeaky clean either. So you have to be careful in picking up this argument. I think what you want to see, if this is going to happen, and it has happened, and the Premier League are going to let it happen, you want to see everybody being reasonable in being very pleased about the fact, if you're a Newcastle fan, that suddenly Newcastle have money and can be more competitive and are out of that era, where the Ashley era, which was soul destroying. I mean, I said to you when I went up to St James's Park, I was sat on a wall outside and two Newcastle fans walked past me, and one of them said to the other, I don't know why we're fucking bothering tonight. And that's what he said. And that's how it had gone up there. So I understand why they wanted, a bit of sunshine and a light at the end of the tunnel, really. But I think you want to see that tempered with an acceptance of the fact that there are big problems with Saudi Arabia from a human rights point of view. And that, as I always say, I feel like your first stance with any owner should be to be suspicious of them and to scrutinise them and to see what they do in practice, but also to properly understand what it is that they're about. And I think a lot of the questions that are being asked about the Saudi takeover are fair.
Is it fair to be suspicious of Leeds' current ownership in a friendly way? I mean, you don't have to be, ranting and raving and going crazy on a blog to hold natural levels of suspicion. Is that the healthiest position to be in, you think?
You should be fair. And I often feel with Radrizzani that, for all his faults and so on, there are times where I think people aren't fair in always appreciating the fact that he was the owner who got them out of that mess, and they'd gone through 14, 15 years of looking like nobody was going to do it at any stage. If anything, there were times when it seemed like it would get worse than just being in the Championship. But at the same time, not everything's perfect. And if we are talking about Europe, there's going to have to be more investment. And, he's going to have to, as majority shareholder, is going to have to help facilitate that investment. So I do think that alongside being fair about the good aspects of an owner's time at a club, you do have to scrutinise what else they're doing, and you do have to keep an eye on everything to basically to hold them to account. Mm-hmm. And I always say we didn't do enough of that with somebody like Ken Bates. I think we did more than enough of it with GFH. We did more than enough of it with Cellino. I think we've been pretty balanced with Radrizzani, and I do think Radrizzani has done some very good things. I mean, compare the stadium and the commercial side of things, even the development of the training ground, and I know Bielsa has pushed a lot of that, but there has been investment, and there have been things that have kind of dragged Leeds into the 21st century. But you should always keep an eye on it, and that will apply if the 49ers become owners. It would apply if Peter Lowy becomes owner or becomes more heavily invested, because it has to.
Why do you think it was then that perhaps there wasn't the same holding to account of Ken Bates back then?
From my point of view, I think I was too inexperienced as a journalist. I mean, it was funny, I was speaking to somebody about Derby County and trying to cover them at the moment. They're in a similar position to Leeds in that they are in administration. It's a complete mess. Nobody knows where it's going. That was my first full season at Evening Post when they got relegated from the Championship. Second full season was the season after they'd gone into administration. And that summer was totally log-jammed by a process that very few of us in the media knew much about, the insolvency and everything else. I was kind of learning on the job with that. I think I could have been braver with him. I think the paper could definitely have been braver with him in that period. But as I always say, that's not to say that there weren't periods where we did take him on, particularly that admin summer. And I was banned twice by the club during that period. But you do, it you do need to scrutinise, because the reality is that very few owners who come into clubs are actually supporters of the club, and they will always talk about prestige and the reputation and the history and everything else. But you've very little idea about how much they knew of that before they started trying to buy the club, and you often suspect that the answer is very little. I mean, for example, I don't think it would have had much credibility if Radrizzani had walked in and started talking about, the Don Revie era and all this, that, and the other. It's almost better to just say, look, I wasn't around for any of that. I don't necessarily know a huge amount about it, but I like what this club is, and I want to get involved. And in fairness to the Saudis, I don't think there's been too much of that up at Newcastle. I don't think that they're going on too much about Keegan and Shearer and all of that. It's a kind of different take over that, because you have this political aspect to it and the human rights strand, which a lot of people are unhappy about.
I think you're ignoring David Haig and his lifelong affinity with the club when he took over.
But great example though, because what happens when you try and do that, people look and see whether it's actually true, and if it isn't, or if it doesn't appear to be true, then they ask questions.
Yeah, you can't insult the intelligence of your audience, can you?
No, straight away you're on the back foot, because people start to think, well, why are you making that up? Why not just be honest about the fact that, no, I'm not, I don't support this club, or but I want to do good things for it. And ultimately, to go back to the argument about money, I'm sure at Manchester United, if the Glazers go, they would love to think that they will get somebody there who has Manchester United at heart. But given the tiny, tiny proportion of people, states, whatever, who would be able to buy that club, it's quite a big ask.
You are talking about basically Qatar's the only one left outside the Premier League now, aren't you? I mean, and let's not pretend, said this over on our show, if they walked in and said, right, we've got the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Qatar behind us and we're buying Leeds United, it would be met with overwhelming joy. So there is that to say. And I know that we'd all probably have to then go through the moralistic dance of saying, okay, well, I'm going to separate out my football team from the workers dying building the stadiums for the World Cup, because I can't affect that, and we'd do that whole same dance that the Newcastle fans have done, although some of them were actually physically dancing, dressed in Arab headgear and robes and stuff like that, and which there's a difference between, I guess, working it out and putting on a show like that. I don't know quite where I sit on this one.
I think the difficulty comes as well is that when you see what the money can do both for the football club in terms of results immediately on the pitch, but then if you look at Man City, all the investment they've put into the area and how they've built the academy. I mean, Man City's academy is ridiculous. If you can see the aerial view of it, it's like it's its own little town, and it is a brilliant thing to have in a city. It undoubtedly is, but it's trying to.
Well, that's what sports washing is.
Exactly,
isn't it?
It's trying to separate even the good community stuff being done here. You think, well, what about other communities? What are you doing back?
Well, this is the thing. How many migrant workers died building Manchester City's new training village? Were the standards of working slightly better here than they were over there? And can we draw equivalence between them?
But you can understand, can't you, why as a Newcastle fan you would feel a bit victimised over this. The alternative to this is to be stuck with Mike Ashley. So you've got rid of Ashley, you've got owners who suddenly have a lot of money, and you've got all this criticism coming at you, and the natural reaction is to be resistant to that,
because people want to defend the institution, don't you? Which is what actually brings us back to, I guess, the problem you face when you're the local media, in that you've got to keep a strong relationship with the football club, and your audience that you're speaking to are the people who really want to believe in the institution. So you've got to be careful not to criticise the institution too much.
But there are times where you have to be prepared to lose that relationship with the club as well. There are times, as was the case latterly with GFH, where there is just no value in having a relationship with them, because you can see what's going on and you can see how it's all falling apart, and that's blindingly apparent to everybody. But there are some people who will resent the fact that Newcastle are under attack like this. There are some people who will just be making any excuse to say this is good. People shouldn't be criticising us. We've got lots of money. I do understand that viewpoint, and I understand why it is difficult to suddenly have this, what will be perceived as great news for them, and for people to be raining on the parade, on that particular parade. Just don't try and justify it by banging on about Disney and iPhones and everything else. People do not support Disney. People do not support iPhones. They pay for them, but they don't. But they don't support them. And more to the point, PIF don't invest in Disney and iPhones in order for the reputation to rise. They do it to make money. But when you're buying a football club, and it comes back to that term sports washing, it is a way of improving the reputation of a country that has a lot of issues.
Yeah, that's the point exactly you made, wasn't it, Michael? Like it's a completely different relationship, whether you like it or not.
Yeah, there's no point trying to draw any equivalence between them. And Disney don't have, well, Disney do have fans, I suppose, but they're not going
the Disney Ultras.
They're not going week in, week out, are they? They're not having to you've not got
each other with their iPhones.
You've not got Moana away on a Tuesday night or anything, have you? It is a different thing. I think the best hope for this ending badly is them appointing Frank Lampard, which would be, I think, a nice way of them to get through their first £1 billion.
Well, that is exactly what Radrizzani did say, and it was a line that I know will probably be jumped on by Leeds fans, and they'll go, "Oh, well, that's just excusing not spending." But he did say money is not always equal to success. This morning on the interview with Sky News, it helps a lot, but it's true ultimately that there's a kernel of truth there.
You do need some strategy behind it. You need the right people, and that is one of the things that he did really well at Leeds. Was, I think, between Orta and Kinnear and Bielsa, really, really strong management team. I mean, I don't know, maybe this is a good opportunity or a good time for everybody to kind of reflect on how real these last 3 years have been at Leeds, even for allowing for the absence of crowds. When it comes to pure football, that's what we've had in these 3 years. But to ask you a question, if QSI were to buy in tomorrow, and as I say, I think that boat's sailed because it feels like it's felt for a long time now like it would be heading to the 49ers from Radrizzani if it was heading anywhere. But as supporters, if they were promising to spend massive amounts of money, what would your reaction be?
It's like, oh, we're one of those clubs now, are we? I don't know. Because it's funny because...
What about if they dangled DePaul?
Not anymore. That ship has sailed, as we were saying, Phil. No, but I mean, seriously, like I look at Manchester City as an example, and I know they don't have the same reach as, I don't think they've got the same reach as Leeds, but then you look at other clubs that are, have proper worldwide appeal, and their struggles to fill their ground. Maybe they've got too many fixtures these days. I don't know, because they're in so many competitions. But I don't know. Did they strike you as a happy fan base? I don't know. I can't really tell. Maybe I'm just excusing that from my position here as a Leeds fan, where we haven't won anything for ages.
There's a bit of a narrative around them that they're a kind of detached or a bit bored of it and so on. I don't know if that's true. I have to be honest. I don't know a lot of Man City fans, and I'd be surprised. They must be loving the football that they get over there. I mean, when it comes to fans' perspective, I'm kind of bad person to talk to about this because I'm used to like Scottish football being a closed shop, and it has been for. I mean, I'm 40 now. I would say at least 25 years.
You don't look a day over 39, Phil.
No, I definitely don't. And probably a little bit longer as well. So I'm kind of used to that, and I guess a bit conditioned to it. It's not a good thing. But, you sort of learn to exist within that remit and to enjoy your club and your football regardless. But
a little bit like Leeds in League One, I guess.
The Hearts ownership, very straightforward as well over the years, of course.
well, this is it. And you see, even though, I mean, I haven't looked at Vladimir Romanov's story recently, but
I was just on his Wikipedia. He was on Strictly Come Dancing, and he was accused of vote rigging. That's what I was just reading.
The last time I read as well, it was suggesting, and this might be wrong, so for legal reasons, I'll say I don't know if this is strictly true, but he was hiding out in Russia because the Lithuanian authorities were after him. But of course, when he arrives and he gets George Burley and he signs Rudy Scatchell and loads of quality players by our standards, and you're at the top of the league until he sacks Burley after 3 months and it all falls apart or all goes wrong. There is that part of you thinking, I don't really care who he is, and I don't really care what he's done. This is absolutely great. Football's terrific, and you do need to check yourself every now and again. But that is a very natural instinct in football. It's to go back to the start of this. I just feel now that if you're going to compete in the Premier League, unless the landscape of football is about to change massively, which I don't think it is, then how else do you do it apart from via takeovers like this? How else is it done?
I feel like to go back to the question about how we'd feel if we had the same situation, I feel like at the very least what you can do is continue to object to the things that are going on in Saudi Arabia, whereas it feels like, admittedly, Twitter's not a representative example of the fans necessarily, but it feels like an awful lot of Newcastle fans have just gone straight onto the whataboutery and trying to excuse absolutely everything that the regime has done. Whereas actually I feel like there is a bit of middle ground where you can go, do you know what, there are massive, massive problems here, But equally, if we don't have to watch that dreadful side every week, that is also something we can enjoy. Not seeing Jeff Hendrick would be a pleasure. So,
well, I think that's fair. And you're also in a country that has had a really, really strong relationship with Saudi Arabia for a lot of years now and does a lot of trade with them. And well, it's hard for me to say, but the perception isn't that a lot of pressure is put on Saudi Arabia over these issues by the UK government, this one or previous ones. So in that sense, you can imagine people sitting in Newcastle saying, well, why is this our responsibility to do this? But I think you're right. I think if you can strike the balance in saying there are aspects of this I do not like, but do you know what, from a footballing perspective, this could be really good for us, then I feel like almost as a football supporter, that's as much as you can do. I don't really like the idea that people should start boycotting or stop going because it's their club.
The big question that I guess we should finish on is, where is football heading? If this is another step down a road, where does this road lead to?
Well, it seems to me that if you end up with a small cabal of clubs with massively wealthy owners, you're going to create leagues within leagues, i.e. different divisions within the Premier League. And to a certain extent, we're already there, certainly with your top little group. Below that, it can be much of a muchness.
But what if there are 10 billionaires, Phil, then?
Well, there almost need to be 10 or 20 billionaires in order for it to be a level playing field. That's how ridiculous it's become. And if you don't get to that stage, then as much as there was all the fighting over the European Super League, I don't see ideas like that going away. I don't see them not resurfacing further down the line, because you will probably have to create a competition whereby there is some competitive edge in it. And I know there's competitive edge between your clubs who are right at the very top of it, but everybody else feels so distant. And I think even more distant than last season. It does seem as if there's been another leap. And, Liverpool, Chelsea, Manchester City, Manchester United have moved on that little bit more. And, to go back to a common theme on this podcast, I think with a different head coach, Manchester United would be further ahead of everybody other than, within the top four. I think they would be further ahead of the pack below than they are already.